Joining me now with more insight, Arizona Republican Congressman and member of the House Judiciary Committee, Andy Biggs. Representative, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Molly.
Kicking things off, we just heard this report from our colleague Rich Edson, who talked about Comey, what he spoke about most recently. Not particularly shocking, given there was this long discussion about what role the dossier played, and a lot of folks were like, no, this started with Papadopoulos. So I just want to get your thoughts as this kind of new information, this new interview comes out.
Well, I think it indicates very clearly that Mr. Barr was accurate when he said there was spying. We knew that there was spying that went on, and this really isn't news to some of us who've been involved in many of the depositions and hearings that are going forward. But it is an indication that Mr. Comey did something that he should not have done, in that he failed to inform the Trump campaign that there was this potential for interference or conflict with the Russians. That would be a normal thing to do, is to go to the campaigns to warn them off that they were trying to be co-opted. That didn't happen in this case, and that's disturbing.
Yeah, I've heard other people make that same criticism. Now, regarding the Attorney General, Bill Barr, who did not testify before your committee earlier this week. You lamented that a little bit earlier on this week, talking about how you had been looking forward to talking with him. If you get the chance, or what is the unanswered question that you have?
Well, I want to get back to the origins of the investigation. I think that's where we're trying to get to. I know that the Inspector General is looking at a part of it, but also Mr. Barr has indicated he wants to know what happened as well, because this investigation was commenced over some dubious claims that were made. And I mean, the interaction between Strzok and Orr and Page and Andy McCabe and what they were trying to do seems odd to me, and I want to get to the bottom of that.
The Mueller report came out, of course, that some thought this might be the grand finale, but now there's talk that Mr. Mueller himself will testify. Would you like to see him testify? Do you want to hear from him? And will that finally shut the doors that remain open here?
Well, I would love to interview Mr. Mueller and participate in that as well. But will that shut the door? That's a great question. I don't think so. I think this is a revolving door. This isn't a regular door. This door is going to just keep revolving around. Yeah. Yeah.
Shifting gears, I really want to get to the border. A lot of important things happening down there. A tremendous amount of effort, an enormous amount of people pouring over the border, causing all sorts of problems. But one of the big headlines is that the Trump administration will start asking migrants for DNA tests to match essentially with children who, unfortunately, in some cases are literally being sort of what's been called recycled and being brought into the country repeatedly by people posing as their parents. What are your thoughts on this effort, this testing period that's about to begin?
Well, I actually think it's necessary, because in a briefing that I had when I was on the border 2 weeks ago, we're finding out that there are these human trafficking rings going on all over the country where they are recycling children. And we haven't had a database even on the names and identification of these children. It is now being created, and we're woefully behind the curve on that. So adding DNA to it is going to be very helpful. And it'll also help us assess whether the claims are valid or not.
Yeah, my question in this is what about the non-traditional family? These are people that are coming here seeking asylum, they claim, because they're fleeing violence. Perhaps there's been a parent that has been killed because of that violence, and it's the aunt or the cousin or that is now the parent. So what does that mean for those people?
Well, what it means is that would be the exception rather than the rule, Molly, because what's happening is the vast majority are released into the country and they don't come back for their determination hearing. And those that do come back, it's a very small minority. I mean, a very small minority that have a valid asylum claim. Those who do come back, the vast majority of them, they don't have a valid claim. So this is going to help us determine that.
Also, the numbers just staggering down there. 103,000 migrants crossing the southwestern border in March. That's an increase over February. There are some 50,000 migrants being housed. That is beyond the congressionally mandated limit. The president asking for more funding, $4.5 billion. Where do we go from here to even begin to solve this problem?
Well, we have to do a couple of things. First of all, we need to secure the border. We build the wall. We need to change the asylum laws. I think we can do some simple things like make the Border Patrol agents immigration officers. That would allow them to make the initial determination with regard to asylum questions. There's some things that we can do to interdict this. We need Mexico's help terribly. They're not giving us much help. They're doing something a little bit more now, but they're not anywhere near where they need to be. Congress needs to give some money. We need to work on the Flores decision. This is just so big and so overwhelming. And so when you say 103,000 across, I mean, that's who we apprehended, and we don't even know how many people actually entered.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't seem to be getting any smaller, that's for sure. Congressman Indy Biggs, thank you for joining us. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about the border today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. North Carolina Congressman and a member of the House Appropriations Committee, David Price, to talk about all of this. Congressman, thanks for joining us. You had a chance to hear that report from Rich Edson there, and he kind of goes the back and forth between Comey and the president that's occurring right now. And I feel like it's kind of remarkable. The former FBI director, such a powerful investigator, coming out now from this sort of moralistic stance, trying to shame the president. What are your thoughts on that? When we think about investigators supposed to be, impartial as they're conducting these investigations, and now to hear this language from Comey so openly.
Well, the point about how the president weaves this alternative web of facts and people get caught up in it, and there's no way out where one's dignity and integrity remain intact. I do think that's a realistic observation. I think of Secretary Nielsen and the circumstances under which she left Homeland Security, for example, and there are many, many more examples. But speaking of alternative takes on reality, these illusions, this kind of wishful thinking about Kim Jong-un and the situation in North Korea really just takes your breath away. And the fact that they're just ratcheting up these tests, these battlefield weapons, and now these short-range weapons, and stopping short of the out-and-out violation of the promises that were supposedly made, but still the president not only tolerates this, but continues to entertain these illusions, perpetrate these illusions about this brutal dictator, and how one would possibly hope to get an agreement in this situation.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear even those that are close to the president talking about sort of his style as far as developing relationships with world leaders, particularly world leaders right now, particularly that are so deeply criticizing, as you mentioned, these despots, these dictators. Shifting things back to Special Counsel Mueller, would you like to see him testify before Congress? You had written that's something you'd like to hear, and you want to hear from his conclusions directly. What is it that you're looking for?
Well, I think it's essential that we hear from Mueller, especially now that we know that he objected strongly to the way his report was characterized by the Attorney General, and that the Attorney General essentially lied about that before the Congress, gave a very, very false, misleading impression about Mueller's acceptance of his 4-page supposed summary of the report. We need to untangle that. And of course, there's a lot about the Mueller report itself that we need to understand more fully. The supportive evidence.
I agree that it has to be untangled.
There's all kinds of reasons
I think some of the language, when you talk about Speaker Pelosi talking about a crime concerning Barr, and you talk about the language being untangled, I think it does need to be untangled, because the question that was asked was about a team versus Mueller directly, and I think you can. Well, there's so much talk about semantics in Washington, whether it's wall or fence or.
That's a kind word. I would call it hair splitting. I'd call it hair splitting, and I'd call it deliberately misleading.
That some people could, and then but is Mueller the same as Mueller's team? And I think that discussion will go on, but ultimately, obviously, like you say, various parties want to get answers. Shifting to infrastructure, because I didn't want to let infrastructure go before I get a chance to talk with you. It's so big. The president and the Democratic leadership working out this $2 trillion deal. I guess the big question, of course, is will it come to pass? Is it enough? But the president did tweet about this, saying there's nothing easy about a U.S. infrastructure plan, especially when our great country has spent an astounding $7 trillion in the Middle East over the last 19 years. But I'm looking hard at a bipartisan plan of $1 to $2 trillion, badly needed. $2 trillion. Is that just a start? Will we actually see this happen? There's such a battle in Washington over everything, DACA, Supreme Court nominations. Just the list has been so voracious and so long. Can we get a compromise on infrastructure?
Well, you're right. This is a more positive topic, or at least I hope it is, because for years now we've looked at this need for repairing the country's infrastructure, investing in a diverse infrastructure for the future. We've looked on that as an economic imperative for the country, and something that we should be able to get together on, since we all talk about it a lot. The president has been a disappointment so far in terms of the kind of non-plan that he put forward. But like a lot of other people, I was looking very closely at the talks this past week with Chuck and Nancy and the president, and I'm hopeful that we can break out of this. There's going to have to be some way of paying for this. That's always been the challenge before with our Republican colleagues. They just aren't willing to commit to that. I am chairman of the Transportation and Housing Appropriations Subcommittee. And I have to say that we are on our way to doing a nice down payment on infrastructure. We didn't get much help from the president on that. In fact, the president's budget inexplicably actually cut infrastructure.
I mean, so much about
funding
politics is about funding and spending and where all the money goes. Congressman Price, thank you so much for talking with us today. We're running out of time, but I really appreciate it. We had a fabulous discussion. Thank you.